Assalamu alaikum. Welcome for another episode of the Hindy Project podcast. Today I had a great guest, Boonaa Mohammed, world famous artist, spoken word poet, director, actor. We talked a little bit about his work and we talked about a bunch of other stuff. I can't even remember what we talked about. We talked about, the experience of a black Muslim. We talked about Donald Trump. We talked about, I'm blanking a little bit, but it was really good. You guys should definitely listen. Hope you guys enjoy.
To make it a bit more, the interesting part was that I would try and do stuff with the guest.
Oh.
So like I had one episode, I interviewed Sheikh Mohammed Faqih.
You're good to go.
Oh, so we're talking. Okay.
Yeah.
Just keep going.
So I interviewed Sheikh Mohammed Faqih and we were playing foosball.
Okay.
So now I was asking him about domestic abuse and we're talking about like marital relations issues. And then I realized this is kind of inappropriate. Like we're like talking about something so serious. I'm like, yeah, I got you, Sheikh, So we had to kind of cut back on the things that we could do.
Yeah.
But like there's all these really popular podcasts and shows that are like guests doing things with the host.
Right.
So there's someone called Hot Wings, I think it's called.
Right, and they're eating really hot wings. Yeah, I heard about that.
Yes, but he's interviewing him while they're like
they're
experiencing
doing that,
with these. Yeah, so everyone's Kevin Hart now, a big comedian. He has one where he interviews like people in a bathtub of ice.
Huh.
It's called like an ice bath or whatever. Like whatever athletes use.
Athletes,
yeah. So the whole
That's
thing
crazy.
is like the experience of like, oh, it's just freezing. So tell me about your newest, So.
But that would be pretty cool. Like that would make me watch, I think. Because you know what, this idea kind of came out of me and Sheikh Hussam were talking about doing. There was a show in the Arab world. There's a bunch of sheikhs sit together and they're having tea, and then they're just talking and they're joking and whatever. And one sheikh kind of leads the conversation each time, but it was a pretty cool show, relatively speaking. But they had like the big names. They had like Muhammad Arifi and like Saman Lauda and all these types of people. And we were talking.
I've seen it actually.
Yeah, you probably.
They do it like in the desert.
Sometimes in the desert, sometimes in like a garden. It's like different settings and stuff. Yeah. We were talking about doing like a version of that for here, and it would have been cool. But then I was like, too much work.
We should do it like in the snow.
In the snow, yeah.
It should just be like
And
all the shuyukh build snowmen.
Yeah.
And then they just join the saf and they pray with us. Oh, no, it's haram. We can't build snowmen.
Yeah, it's too many gaps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Khair,
But
inshallah.
yeah, so then this was kind of like the next option where like I actually just sit down with someone and have a casual conversation as if we're just both drinking coffee, which you actually are.
Yeah. I was happy there wasn't video because I felt like I'm gonna have to like hide the logo or something.
It's okay, you can advertise. It's Tim Hortons.
Timmy's. I need a sponsorship deal. Hook me up. I'm waiting for that Tim Hortons money. Get that double check.
So what have you been up to lately?
I've been touring my latest film,
Nice.
which, as you know, we showed Tug of War at Dar Tawheed.
Yeah, right.
So the newest one, Detainee X,
Okay.
is about a young American Muslim kid who gets wrongly accused of being a terrorist and sent to this like secret black site prison
Wow.
and tortured. Very reminiscent of like Omar Khadir and other people who have been subjected to that type of treatment.
Yeah.
So we explored that theme and this idea and this kind of fictitious character, but in a very real world. He's living in like a post-Trump America. And there's a lot of very strong Trump rhetoric. Actually, Trump makes a few cameos in the film.
Really?
I didn't pay him. He just showed up. No, we just like used clips of him talking.
Yeah.
And it just works very well with the theme because that's kind of the world we're living in today. Like
true.
the very right-wing, kind of white supremacist, alt-right rise that, it's not just
crazy.
happening here in Canada. US
Yeah, it's
very
everywhere.
heavily. Europe is massive, right? I just came back from Australia, in Australia again. And it's the same language they use, but in different aspects. Like it's all about, we need to reclaim our heritage or, this idea of, preserving white culture.
Yeah.
It's like, what is that?
Yeah.
I heard a good joke on a TV show one time. They're like, hey, we're going to get some great Canadian food. Want to join us? And I was like, it's a joke because you're like, what is
What's
Canadian
Canadian?
food? Like
Poutines.
Poutine, yeah,
That's it.
that's it. Right?
Yeah, that's crazy. So you were like making this film and you're thinking like in this like imaginative future, it's going to be like terrible for Muslims. And then you finish the film and it's actually exactly the way you described it to be.
Yeah. The odd thing is I wrote it before Trump got elected.
Wow.
And he was still in it. It was just his rhetoric I didn't think was going anywhere.
Yeah.
Because of
at the time it was just like
at
whatever
the time
candidate.
he was whatever candidate, but his kind of backative was so strong.
Right.
And the messaging was so clear that his message wasn't going anywhere and his ideas and philosophies and which is really strange because the more I kind of think about Trump and like who he was pre-presidency, it's like all these like celebrities and people knew him and he was like
It's true.
He was like this funny dude that people made fun of.
Yeah.
You know, he was like known for being rich, but at the same time, like a really bad business person.
Right.
And so he was just kind of like a laughing stock. He was just joke. And so now his views, I feel like, I don't even know if they're really his. Part of me feels like he's an idiot and he's just saying what's on his mind, but there definitely must be some people behind him.
Well, I think it works two ways. First of all, I think that like one thing is like America's like all these like especially liberal Americans, they're like these people, Trump and John Bolton and this person and that person he hired, they're all terrible, terrible people. Who gave those people platforms to begin with? It was the white liberals, right? Like John Bolton was not just the liberals, but the Republicans were anti-Trump too. John Bolton was in George W. Bush's administration, right? This guy was working, Mike Pompeo or whatever, the CIA guy was working for the CIA at the time, and he was like promoted by whatever Republican or Democratic president. So they're the ones who gave these people platforms, and then now they're horrified that Trump went around and picked like the worst of them and put them together.
Like a Frankenstein.
Yeah. The other thing is like Trump's like 80 years old, so I think he does believe some of the stuff he's saying.
He's just too old to care at this point. He's just that old angry uncle phase of his life.
Exactly. The other thing is that maybe he didn't believe it to start, but he realized that people were like totally like willing to elect him for it. And then at some point you start believing your own BS at some point.
Yeah, but it's like, I can understand the rhetoric pre-election and those kind of supports that come out of the right wing and, the Nazi groups and the KKK who like indirectly endorse this guy, even though he's like, whoa, like, I don't want your endorsement, but they're like, ha ha ha, wink, wink, we know. But it's like after the fact, it's like, okay, you're elected now. So now you have an opportunity. You're not still held accountable to those same constituents. Like you can do whatever you want at this point. But to see that he actually is going further than what they even suggested. I mean, I think his days are numbered. I don't think he's he's definitely gonna get impeached for something stupid.
I don't think he's gonna get impeached.
You don't think so?
He can't.
Oh, are you kidding me? They've impeached for less.
The House is all Republican. The Senate's all Republican. All of them are scared like crazy of him.
Just one really good scandal has to come out.
What? What possible scandal could there be against York?
I'm working on it.
Like they're like, he slept with a porn star, and his conservative evangelical followers are like, that's cool, he's still our guy. Like, it doesn't even matter anymore.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a matter of time, though. I feel like he can only BS for so long until, because now even his own parties are turning on him. Like people within his campaign and everyone who helped get him there, like, what the hell did we do? Like, who is this person? So I think, it's like, he's like, what's that story about the emperor with no clothing? Right. Where at some point it's like you're just going to be the walking fool, and everyone's knowing it except for you. Yeah. To the extent where like eventually something's gonna have to happen.
I don't know. You're more optimistic than I am.
It's not even a sense of optimism. I'm very pessimistic about the fate of that nation, but it's just I don't think he's going to last as the head for very long.
Yeah, I mean, I could see him getting voted out after his first term, but we'll see. I don't really see the impeachment thing happening. So you're doing like directing now. Directing is like your main thing, eh?
Mainly writing, to be honest.
Writing.
Directing is a whole different craft.
Okay. But you directed the first movie, right?
No, I actually had a director.
You had a director?
Yeah. He's an Afghani brother named Mani Osman.
Okay.
And he's, to be a director, you have to artistically and technically be very sound. And he shoots and directs, which is also very rare. Mostly you'll find a director. I could direct if I had a really good camera operator, right? Because that camera person is then in charge of capturing those images. I just tell him what to do. Right. But in our case, I'm like super duper low budget. So it's like you're the director and you're the director of photography, they call it, like the camera operator. Right. So he does both. And to be honest, narrating stories to me is more difficult. Like creating a story from scratch, right? And I think writers usually, especially in Hollywood, they don't get really any respect, but like it's really, they're the architects of every good motion picture, right? Like to envision scene by scene, character build by character build, this story that unfolds. It's a very difficult thing. And I'm a writer, that's kind of my background, but writing for film, screen is such a different beast. Oh yeah. And I've been really like just studying it and working at it for a few years now.
They blame the writer when things go bad, but then they praise the director when things go good.
Yeah, I mean, people really even don't praise writers even when things turn out well. They usually prefer the actors. They'll be like, oh, the actor gave a stunning performance. And you're like, this guy just said what this guy told him to say,
Yeah. But when things are bad, then they're like, just like, man, the writing is just terrible.
Yeah, I mean, writers do get even in Hollywood, like, you know, writers don't get paid as well. They don't get the same kind of respect. But
I think like, because the writing of the actual lines and script is different than the crafting of the story, right? Because I think like the producers craft the story.
No, writer does everything.
Like they come up with a whole concept to start with.
So there's different variations. Like sometimes you'll have a writer who is commissioned to write a specific story. Like for example, I don't know if you know the Steve Jobs film. I forget what it's called.
I didn't
it's
watch
called
it,
Jobs or something. I don't know what it's called. But the writer who wrote it, Aaron, I'm going to butcher his last name, Skorskovich or something like that. I actually studied a course that he put online.
Oh yeah, the guy did West Wing.
He did West Wing. He did Social Media. He did Social Network. The
his name too.
Mark Zuckerberg film. Yeah. So he's a very well respected writer. So sometimes
his writing has like a certain style to it.
Yeah.
So like,
and it's very
fast paced.
It's very fast paced, and he usually does a lot of biopics.
Right.
But his focus is, for example, like sometimes somebody would tell him, "Hey, I want you to make a film on Steve Jobs."
Yeah.
So then he's tasked with then researching, getting anecdotes from people, interviewing people, and coming up with the story. So sometimes the story is commissioned, but the story itself still needs to be built upon, right? Someone tells you, in this case of Steve Jobs, the story is already there. You already know what happened to him. But so he decides to zoom in and focus on specific aspects of his life, whatever. Other times, what typically would happen is a writer would just write a script out of thin air, just create, story, and then shop that script around. Then they would shop it to studios. They have like even script competitions. So the same way they have film festivals, they have like screenwriting festivals.
Interesting.
So then you would submit your film, your script idea, sometimes just a synopsis. Other times there's a website called The Blacklist, which is basically it's like this big membership only. Executives get access to it, and they basically have access to all these different scripts. And they'll look at them. Some studios will pick up on the script. Other studios will pass on the script. But you as a writer post your script there, and you hope that some big producer will just look at it and read it and say, I want to turn this into a film.
And there's no fear of them like ripping off your idea.
No, I mean, you sign a non-disclosure, I guess, at that level. At that level, things are pretty legit. Like if you see your film come out, you're going to, some lawyers are going to get called. Yeah. But with us, because obviously I'm super duper duper low budget, I write the stories. My main thing actually was always acting. I like acting. Right. Acting to me is a really cool experience. But I found that there weren't any avenues for me to act at all. Like, especially as like a practicing Muslim, like I'm not going to just sign up and do whatever. So I figured the best way would just be write my own stories. Right. And write stories and characters that I personally would like to play. Right. And that I felt were impactful, and that I felt also had an interesting narrative or story to tell. And I'm a big proponent of reclaiming our own narratives,
for sure,
because of the fact that people are always making films about Muslims, but rarely are Muslims making films about themselves.
Yeah.
Having sometimes difficult conversations, having sometimes unique perspectives. There's a film right now that I'm finishing up. We shot it last year. It's called Forever Gone. Okay, this is like world preview, so your podcast is about to get another 100,000 downloads today, inshallah. So it's a film based upon the story of Borsisa.
Oh, interesting.
You know the story of Borsisa. Yeah, Borsisa, the monk who was a monk during the time of Bani Israel. It's a story narrated by Ibn Kathir. And it's this monk who falls in love with his next door neighbor, and they end up making zina, and he ends up killing her and whatever. The story is actually about the tricks of shaitan, right? And how shaitan comes to him step by step. So I made a modern day adaptation of this film, of this story, and we turned it into a film. And it's about like a junior imam. So imagine like he's more of just a Quran teacher, and he's kind of forced to look after his local masjid after his father, who is the imam, passes away, and he's kind of put in charge of the situation there. And he's in the middle of his Islamic studies, so he hasn't really graduated. He's just come back in the summer, and like he's just forced to now take over. And he's actually suffering from very bad depression. And he's also in a state of denial. And mental health, again, is a huge issue in this film, because it's one of those topics that we don't talk about enough, I feel. And so he slowly becomes addicted to sleeping pills, because he has this like insomnia. He can't sleep at night, and he builds up a heavy dependency to the point where he wants to take more and more and more. And his doctor, I'm just telling the whole story here, right? This is the whole movie. You don't even have to see the movie. You just listen to this. Yeah. So anyways, long story short, like, I don't want to give the whole story. He follows the same pattern. His next door neighbor, he lives next to this family. I play the imam, by the way. Okay. Oh, wow. Yeah. So just giving you guys a heads up.
Give yourself the best part.
Well, the best or worst part, you have to decide. And basically, I fall in love with my next door neighbor. There's a family of 2 brothers and a sister, and they have to go back home. Their father is sick, so they asked me to watch over their sister. And, you know, at first we have a very awkward, like, I'm trying my best to stay away from her. She's just trying her best to stay away from me, whatever. And then one day we get stuck in an elevator together. We live in a really old, crummy building. Actually, I got a building downtown on Church Street. Like, really old, one of those, like, elevators with the doors you have to shut manually.
Right.
And we get stuck in it. And we're like forced to converse and talk, and you know, there's a bit of understanding there, and then, you know, just Shaitan plants the seed from there, and that's, you know, the rest of the story.
Interesting. No, that's like, you know, someone was telling me about this. Actually, a brother who's really sick right now with cancer. So ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to heal him. Older brother. He was telling me the story about how when they came to this country a long time ago. He's very much older, and he was telling me that Jewish accountants and lawyers couldn't get jobs in firms, like accounting firms and law firms. And so what they did was that they all started their own firms. And then he's like, and then 20, 30 years later, their firms became the best firms in the business. Like the Jewish law firms were like the top.
And do you know
firms.
what kind of law they did? It was corporate litigation law.
Really?
So it was seen as the worst type of law. It was, they used to basically, when corporations wanted to buy out other corporations, it was like very
like
lowly.
Acquisitions.
Acquisitions. Very lowly work that no respectable lawyer would take on.
Yeah.
So, sorry, I just interrupted your story, but because I know that story. And it's interesting because after the fact is that they basically started their own Jewish firms that specialized in this.
Yeah.
And then when acquisition law became very popular, they were already ahead of the game.
Right.
And they were very successful because of that.
Yeah. But the whole point was that like they were being discriminated against at the time because they're Jewish and nobody wanted to hire them. They ended up like creating their own way into it. Because one of the things, and I talked to my sister and we did one podcast together, and she's the same thing. Like she's like, I want to do this, but then like acting as a Muslim woman in hijab, and how am I going to do that? And how am I going to do this? And how am I going to do that? And I'm like, you just have to create your own way, right? It's like you writing is just, it's exactly that. Like, yeah, Hollywood is not going to exactly open the door and be like, we're looking for a religious Muslim who has like, you know, religious restrictions to come in and
unless
be
one of the pirates in a Somali ship or something.
That's basically the only thing you're going to get. If that. 'Cause they might,
even those guys are not really practicing. Probably, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, or they're going to pay them like $10,000 and that's going to be the extent of their work.
Yeah.
You heard about the guy from...
Yeah, Captain Phillips.
Captain Phillips.
Oh, he's good now, but I mean, it was.
Is he? He's got other jobs.
Oh yeah, he's got. He was in. I want to say Star Wars.
Oh, okay.
He was in Star Wars, the last one.
Was he? Yeah, he was incredible, and they paid him like nothing.
Yeah.
He was like on the movie, like he was his screen
movie.
time was him.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I guess also because he wasn't unionized and stuff, so they didn't really have to follow the same rules. But if you were a unionized actor, like that couldn't happen.
Yeah, but still, like they paid him peanuts. Like you paid him like less than like anyone else on their set.
Yeah. Oh, I pay actors a lot less. So,
but it's not like a blockbuster movie.
No,
right?
no.
Anyways,
not even a Bollywood buster. Nothing.
Yeah. But I think like that's the whole thing. Like you got to create your own stories. You got to create your own path because otherwise you're never going to get into it. And then we're just left not telling our stories, right? How do you find yourself received in the community when you're like a Muslim artist? Do you see that like...
I mean, I think it's been a weird journey for myself as an artist because I started off doing art mainly for non-Muslims.
Right.
My audience initially, like when I had first come out into the scene,
Yeah.
I used to do slam poetry. So actually before all of this, I used to be a rapper.
Really?
I'm coming out of the closet, yeah. This is my
man.
confession. Yeah. I used to be a rapper.
Like, get your like masjid visa revoked.
I know. So I used to, I'm talking about like high school days. Like I used to write raps and stuff in high school.
Yeah.
And then I got into theater and I did like a few plays. And I actually had a playwright residency at a theater in Toronto.
Wow.
To write a play that I was actually... I'm still inshallah working on turning it into a film. It's a story based on a friend of mine who passed away in 2009. He was kind of killed, and it was a tragic, like, you know, one of those like street kids, whatever, stories. But so I started off writing poetry, acting, and as a performer, I participated in something called poetry slam competitions. So they're not as popular in the Muslim community. I am trying to bring them back. I know, actually, I think your sister's hosting one.
We're trying to do one.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not going great though.
Is it? Why not?
Tickets are just not.
Oh, really?
Going, yeah.
Yeah, but what's the reception like from the kids and stuff? Like, do you have contestants and stuff?
Yeah, because like they've done it basically at the masjid for a couple of years, and like the kids will come from the school especially and attend, but they want to do it bigger, and they got like a bunch of names, you included.
Yeah.
I think they got a bunch of good artists.
Yeah, they got Mustaqim, they got a bunch of other dudes, yeah.
For some reason, I don't know. It's just not.
Yeah, it's a learning curve. Like, I don't think the community really understands what it is.
Right.
And part of it, and I'm going to be at this event, but there's a certain vibe and culture to poetry slams.
Right.
That if you've been to a normal, like, I don't want to say the word normal as if we're unnormal, but like a typical non-Muslim poetry slam, they usually take place in bars and cafes. Right. People are mostly intoxicated, so their responses are much more, you know what I mean? Like, people are engaged, they're chanting with you. So as an artist, you like feed off of that. Right. But then when you come to the Muslim crowd, it's like I tell brothers, is like I went from performing for audiences that were like stomping their feet and snapping and laughing and crying, and to just a bunch of like aunties in the room, like, okay. You know? Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Comedians say the same thing. It's like,
yeah, Muslim crowds are the worst crowds by far. The only benefit I have is that I'm doing poetry, so typically you don't need to have much crowd reaction or response. Right. And they just kind of absorb it and walk home, and they, just think about it, and they're like, hey, it was good, like they'll tell me like, wow, it's great, fantastic. But in the moment while you're doing it, you're looking at blank faces. And it's very distracting, actually. But it's just part of the culture that unfortunately we have. There are communities that are better than others. Like, I love university crowds. University crowds are typically a bit more open. And in the US, it's like open season. Man, I did I was at ICNA, Mass ICNA in Baltimore just a few weeks back. And we hosted a poetry slam there. It was another organization that I work with. And a sister who actually, I held an online poetry slam a few years back with another brother named Amara Shukri, whom you probably know. Yeah. So Sheikh Amar, I should call him now. He's Sheikh now, mashallah. So myself and him, he's a great poet, and we hosted this online competition. And this sister won. She's from the UK. She's from London. And long story short, she moved to New York, and now she's like, kind of facilitating poetry slams herself. So she hosted one at ICNA at Baltimore. And honestly, I was so impressed by the crowd participation and the fact that people in the middle of the poems were like, snapping, and they were like engaged with it, and they were like, preach on, sister, you tell, like that culture is what poetry slam's about. Right. And just in the Muslim crowd, in this like immigrant world and community, we just don't have that. But there are certain places, like if you go to, like, man, one time I performed at this like African-American event. Oh, it was the best feeling it was actually Imam Saraj Wahaj's masjid. His masjid in New York called Masjid Taqwa. It was their 30-year anniversary. It was a few years back. And they had really big names on the bill. Actually, Mos Def was there.
Wow.
Yeah, Yassine Bey. So he came out that time as Yassine Bey. He actually performed. Funny enough, Abdullah Hakim Quick was there. Hamza Yusuf was there. Sohaib Webb was there. A lot of big people. And then he specifically called me, Saraj Wahaj, found my number, called me and was like, hi, assalamu alaikum, this is Brother Boonaa. I'm like, yes. He's like, this is Saraj Wahaj. I'm like,
what?
I'm like, come on, seriously. Like, this is some Nigerian prince trying to get money out of me? Like, who is this? You know what I mean? And he's like, no, I want you there. And I was like, what? I was like, this sheikh invited me? Like, and that was probably like 8 years ago.
Wow.
So he was still really big then, right? And he was probably the most popular. Yeah, but like at that time, he was pretty popular as well. So I was like, 100% I'm there. And his crowd was like, I would say 80% African American, because his community is very strong there. And I did like 2 poems, and the first poem I did, like I couldn't even get past 5 lines without the crowd erupting and like clapping, and as a performer, I just fed off of it. Like that's what you want, Some people get nervous by that, but crowds to me are like my best friends. So when a crowd is really, really positive and they're there and supportive, like I get better. The energy, right? And that's a performer's best dream. So I had. Is
it just like the Canadian American culture? Because like it's just Canadians are more subdued and Americans are just more.
You know what? The UK is much worse, by the way. Really? The UK is horrible. Europe is even worse. Europe, sometimes it's maybe cultural and language barriers, because many places in Europe, English is not their first language. But it's just, we also have this kind of religiosity or this perception of religiosity, which says that you can't enjoy yourself, you can't smile, you can't clap, you can't snap, you can't show any form of like appreciation or whatever. Meanwhile, if you go to like the Muslim world and you go to like, like the Qur'an in Masr, for example, and everybody that goes, oh, I always love that. Yeah, you know what I mean? And they're like, and they're shouting and they're engaged by it,
But I feel like, I remember Sheikh Mohammed Sharif because he was in the US for so many years, and then he came to Canada. And he told me as soon as I came to Canada, he's like, I gave this talk. I forgot what he gave it about. He gave this talk and he kind of touched on like a controversial topic. I don't know, one of them, mortgage, whatever. One of the ones that was pushing people's buttons. And he's like, and then somebody came up to him after the khutbah here in Canada, and it was like his first khutbah back from the US. And he's like, okay, getting ready. The person's like, you said this about this topic, right? And he's like, yes. And then he's like, I'm ready. Whatever he says, I got like all my dalil in place. I'm ready,
ready to go.
Ready to go. Whatever he says, I'm gonna throw it back at him. And then the guy's just like, okay, thanks. That's what I thought. And he was like, because he's like used to America. He's like, somebody comes up, asks you a question like that, they're ready to argue with you. They're gonna argue with you, and he's like on his toes. Like, but in Canada, everyone's like so subdued. And just like. Unless even if they disagree with you, it's like, sir, respectfully, I disagree. Sorry.
I mean, it's a different culture. I also think that it's a very long discussion, but if you look at the history of which Muslims are where, right? Like which Muslims migrated to America versus which Muslims migrated to Canada or the UK. So typically speaking, immigration laws were such that you could only come to the US if you were highly educated, if you had a master's or PhD or they only took the quote unquote best of the best, right? Canada somewhat in the middle, Australia somewhat in the middle. Canada took a lot of refugees, like my family came as refugees, political refugees. Whereas in the UK, it was like you were a former colony from India. So you come from the countryside, you come from whatever. From anywhere. The backwards part of wherever you're from. Hey, Bismillah, come join us, So,
sorry, I don't want to cut you off. Someone told me a story of like, there's a village in India, and the British did something and they messed up some dam, so flooded the whole village. So they went to the village leaders and like, okay, we'll pay for you to move your village over or whatever. And the village leaders are like, nope, the only thing we'll accept is passports.
Nice.
So they transported the entire village from India all the way into the UK.
And that's how Bradford was made. There's a bunch of cities like that in the UK that are just one tribe.
Wow.
Like one village, not even. Not even Qabila. Village. That's just from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, whatever, and just plopped in the middle of the UK. And you have people like second generation, third generation. I kid you not, they speak with it like an Indian accent. And I'm like, dude, you were born here. And why can't you speak English? Like,
there's people who don't speak English. Second generation.
They don't. Some. I mean, of course, the majority do speak, but there are some that are just so they're living in such a cultural bubble that they just don't have to. Like
they don't need to.
They just don't interact with anyone that would ever challenge their, authenticity. They just whatever.
It's crazy.
It's like the complete opposite. I mean, integration is a very strange word because I think it has a weird connotation, but I think it can be a positive thing in the sense that, like, as Muslims, we're supposed to contribute to the societies we come to. Like, anywhere Muslims have mass migrated historically has always become a better society. But unfortunately, today's trends, and this is partly due to colonization and how we ended up where we ended up, the Muslims who do come to these nations, unfortunately, many times we just become like a plague on the system. People just abuse welfare. People have this notion of like, I don't want to. Maybe you think. Some people might think paying taxes is haram, and you're like, dude, you're living here, you're using the services, right? You go to the hospital, OHIP card, Bismillah, you're first in line, but all of a sudden it's haram for you to pay for that access, right? So it's this very weird kind of skewed perception of like wala wal bara, like what does it mean to be a citizen? What does it mean to show allegiance? And these are very kind of big terms that most people don't really understand, anyways.
Yeah, I don't think most people don't understand it. I find that people just use it for like whenever they find it's advantageous, then all of a sudden, like, oh, I have to pay taxes? No, I don't. Here's my justification for evading it.
Exactly. But meanwhile, you still use welfare. And welfare is government money.
Right? Well, the worst is like they come here, they leave their family's on welfare, they go to another country and they're working, and they never see their kids.
The mother pretends like she's single. This is another big scam.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
I'll tell you how our community works. Not mine, but I'm saying like
But
Muslim
honestly, it's a lot of
communities,
communities, man.
right? Where the mom and dad on paper are separated.
Yeah.
Right. So that way the mother gets access to better services.
Yeah.
And the dad just like sneaks in at night, stays with the family, whatever. Kids barely see him. Maybe he has 2 wives, maybe, a family overseas.
But that's him being in the country.
Yeah, that's him being in the country.
No, because there's a lot of cases they're not even in the country. They're like in Dubai or they're in Saudi and they're working.
Yeah, a lot.
And then, no, it's destructive because then like the women still have needs, right? So like the wife is like, going crazy and she's like sometimes tempted and things like, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's tough for them. And then
I can imagine.
the kids have like no father figure growing up with I don't know.
Well, that's the job of the imam. You have to be everyone's father figure. So.
It's terrible, man. Like you just feel bad for some of these kids.
There's a lot of families that, I'm not going to say any ethnicities, but there are a lot of families from certain cultures and backgrounds that do have kind of the separation between the father and the family, where the father's, and it's culturally understood that the father's job is to go out and make money. The mother's job is to stay home and raise kids. So because of that, the father feels like, well, I don't actually have to raise the kids. I don't actually have to spend time with them. It's not my job to do so.
So like, because I think you might be thinking about like Somali families or like that. I'm thinking about like Arab families, actually, the ones that were in my head. But I think from the Somali perspective, because I read a paper on this, it's that in Somalia, they expect like the grandparents to raise the kids.
Yeah, I wasn't actually talking about Somalis. I was more talking about like even Ethiopians, Eritreans. Eritreans have a big culture. And my wife's Eritrean, so I can talk smack about them. But they, for example, will have fathers who work in Saudi, who work in Abu Dhabi, whatever, and just send money back.
And I think the family structure in those countries different.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a village to raise a child. That's the kind of like, idea that you grow up upon, right? Yeah. I was having this discussion with, who was it? I think it was my wife the other day, just about the fact that like my dad fled Ethiopia when he was like 17 or something like that, 16. He was like, he was wanted by the government. Wow. He left. Eritreans are like that. Every Eritrean you see here in Canada is like running away from back home, right? So they all come here. Many of them, like my father never had a father, right? My father's father, my grandfather, died when my father was quite young. So, and my mother's mother died when she was quite young. So imagine my father trying to raise boys in Canada, not having a father relationship himself, and actually being in a different world. Like he was born at a time when it was just completely different. So that translation of parental skills isn't there. And it's not like our parents study parenting books and modern parenting techniques. It's like, no, should I use the shoe or the belt? Like you get those two options, right? So I think it's an immense challenge for people who are not familiar with the culture, but also are not familiar with raising children. And the conventional sense that we have in the West is that like a father is there with his children. You watch, like I take pride in getting my kids ready for school, picking them up from school. Like this is some of the best times of my day, right? Whereas for other people, it's like a burden. Yeah. And culturally, they've just been conditioned to say that like, well, that's not my job. That's my wife's job. Yeah. Right. And it's aib for my wife to go and work. And if my wife works, then, that makes me look like I can't provide. Yeah. So, there are a lot of cultural norms that unfortunately even Muslims who've grown up here still fall into, just for virtue of culture and identity. And that's how we perceive ourselves to be.
No, that's interesting. I was just thinking about the angle because, if the family structure in a country is a certain way, and then because of globalization, or you come to the West and then like the family structure is expected to be completely different. It's like, that's a major disruption of like, the way the person understands that the household should run.
It's interesting. Actually, if you look at the Philippines, the Philippines, which has such a strange reality, which is that a huge, vast majority of the women work internationally. Right.
Yeah, and it's the men who stay home.
And it's the men who stay home. So these women who basically go to Saudi, come to Canada, come to wherever, and they work as domestic laborers as well, and they get abused, and they get worked really hard, and their actual employees hold their passports from them. Yeah. So now you have a generation in the Philippines of men who are basically like demasculated. Their women are out making money, and the vast majority of income in that country is brought in from people overseas. So that's, a weird example of kind of the norm being put on its head. Yeah. And
because of globalization.
And actually it's funny because now when you have someone like Manny Pacquiao,
Yeah.
Right. Manny Pacquiao
They
is so
love him.
so respected in the Philippines because he brought back masculinity.
Yeah.
Right. He brought back that feeling like, we kick butt. Like, this is what we do. We're men,
Yeah.
So when they do have a cultural icon like that, he can do no wrong. Like, I think he's going to run for something. I don't know if he's going to run for president, but he has a good chance of getting into politics and stuff like that just because of what he stands for.
Right.
Similarly, in our cultures, we don't really have any successful models. Like, very rarely can we in the West look at a specific family model and say, like, that's working well, because we're still developing our family models here. We don't have precedents to build upon. We're just talking about what our parents did or what our grandparents did. But like, what do my kids know? I came as a refugee. My wife's parents came as refugees. My wife's from Eritrea. I'm from Oromia in Ethiopia. And like, we're different. They're just Canadian. Like, they're screwed. Like, they have no reference point other than Islam. That's the main thing for us.
Yeah. So you kind of sparked a different conversation I had, though.
Oh, sorry about that.
Like, do you think that our the alt-right is kind of like that same thing as like the Philippines, where it's just like they're desperate to feel manly?
Oh, I think 100%.
Yeah.
I think that people have become so complacent in their own laziness. And, when you have people from Mexico who like lived on $1 a day their whole lives, and they come here and they're like, what? All I got to do is scrub toilets for 12 hours and I can live like a king in Mexico? Like, you're crazy. Like, they're going to work their butts off, So you have people who just have grown up in the laps of luxury their entire lives, minimum wage and these things has been enough to kind of have them flourish. And now the scary part is they actually have to do work. They actually have to do hard work. So I don't think a lot of them are willing to do it. I think a lot of them, they blame globalization, they blame immigration. It's the same kind of talk you heard in Nazi Germany, right? Oh, the Jews are taking all of our jobs, they're taking all of our money. Same thing you hear now in Burma, oh, the Rohingya, they're this, they're that. A lot of people's own insecurities gets then projected onto others, right? That I'm basically stupid and dumb and I can't get money, so it's your fault.
Someone else's fault.
Right, it's someone else's fault.
I mean, there's a truth to it, because like what globalization has done is it's enriched the 1% in the US, but it's also enriched the middle classes in a lot of other countries, like particularly China, other countries. But the middle class in the US has just like been declining like crazy. So there's like a truth to it, where like they're kind of being screwed over because of the policies of their politicians. But yeah, I mean, I feel that's exactly what it is. It's like they don't feel like men anymore.
Yeah.
And they grew up at a time of like the height of luxury, like they were
the
raised
height
in
of
that.
white privilege.
Yeah.
Well, not the height. There was probably a worse time in history for white privilege, but I mean,
but luxury. I mean, think about it. Like, I was hearing another speaker, and they were talking about they had one of their teachers come from, like, a Bedouin teacher, brought him to the U.S. with him, and he looked around and he saw someone holding like a cup like yours, drinking from it. And and then he finished the drinking, or it was a water bottle. I think he finished the water bottle, and he throws it in the garbage. And he's like, "Why do you throw that cup in the garbage?" And they're like, "Well, it's made for single use." He's like, just shocked. He's like, "How?" He's like, "When a civilization has this type of luxury, like, that like it's about to like decline." Yeah. You know what I mean? Because like
he's talking about cups.
What? He's talking cups. It's like, you make a cup, you drink it, you use it constantly.
I'll make sure I save this for you guys, inshallah. If you want to wash it, you can use it later.
Yeah. But you know what I mean? Like, so they grew up in this, like, because we take it for granted, like, the level of luxury that we live in, that you can actually drink a water bottle and throw it away.
Yeah.
And it's like nothing.
It's also, people's experiences, right?
Yeah.
I heard a really interesting anecdote. Winston Churchill, who's a former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, he was riding a train once, and he would sit in coach, and his son would sit in first class. And they asked him, why is that the case? Why do you sit in coach and your son sits in first class? He says, well, I'm the son of a peasant, and my son, his father was Prime Minister of the country, right? Like, his experiences were such that it's different. Like, he was just used to that, whereas his kids are like growing up in this, completely different world than him. So many times, I think when we look at our own cultures, like, my parents have very little reasons to complain. Like, they will look at the world around them, and even when we lived in very difficult situations, in like a 2-bedroom apartment with like 5 kids or 4 kids or whatever, to them it was like, oh, this is great. Like, And many times you'll find people don't even really have ambitions of getting out of that. You know, like public housing and these things is full of Muslims that are completely content.
Right.
You know, because a refugee camp is a lot worse than where they came from.
It's true.
But then when we come here and like I look around and I see the potential and opportunities, obviously I want to excel. I want to do better. But there are still a lot of people who are completely fine with, you know, the way things are.
Yeah. There's a quote from Umar ibn Khattab, and he said, you know, make things difficult for your kids. Like, don't let them live in luxury, because whenever there's good times, there's always going to be bad times afterwards, right? And like rolling back to the whole our alt-right thing, I don't know what's wrong with me today. I feel like that's like the premise of it is like they're just an entitled generation, and they've realized that the entitlements are being taken away. And it's just like anger.
Yeah, but if you also understand racism and the institution of racism and how it was designed and set up, especially in the US and Canada, it was like, you know, your skin was a currency, right? Like you were entitled to this earth because of virtue of who you were or where you came from. So for that premise to be slowly stripped from someone, right, is a very, you know, uncomfortable thing. It's an uncomfortable reality that slowly those parameters that were set up for you to achieve and reach success at a faster and greater pace than anyone else, that includes going into our countries and stealing our resources and stealing our people and using them all for your own success. When that's slowly being made amends, and now it's like, hey, guess what? You know, me and you are eye to eye. You know, that is like, you know, it's like a bank robber having his money stolen, right? Like, yeah, you stole, but it hurts more when it's stolen from you, right? So I think that reality is setting in for some people, and I don't think there's anything they can do to change it. I think their resistance is futile, because that's the way the world is working. I mean, in a few years, we all got to learn Cantonese anyway. So they're, you know, I'm teaching my kids Chinese from now, so they're ready for the new economy. And when the yen comes here, you know. Because it's just globalization it's a fact, you know, that's the way things are working out. So I think for us as Muslims, it's just important that we, you know, maintain firm upon our rights to succeed and excel. Like, you know, ulu al-himma, like to have that highly ambitious, you know, outlook on life. Like we shouldn't be content with just being middle class or being low class. Like live comfortably, you know, don't be excessive, obviously. But like I always tell kids, like there's nothing wrong with being successful. There's nothing wrong with going out there and making money. I remember I went to this is a strange story. I went to an orphanage one time with this group. We went on this like humanitarian mission, and there was one brother in the group who's like a little bit like, I don't want to say Sufi. He's more kind of like, you know, one of those more open-minded, spiritual type of people, whatever. Nothing against Sufis, but I just didn't like him, right? Just because the way he saw things. And I remember we were talking to these kids, these orphans, and he was telling them like, you know, well, what do you want to be? And you know, we're talking to them. And one of them, something came up of just, you know, them wanting to just go to school and learn. And he was like, wow, that's so beautiful. Knowledge is such a gift. And I'm like, dude, let these kids go to school and make some damn money. You're living in an orphanage. You need to get out of here. You need to make your life better for your family, you, people coming up after you. Like we shouldn't be telling kids, this is my opinion, right? That, and I'm talking not Islamic knowledge. I'm talking secular knowledge, right? Secular knowledge is the end goal. Is to just know the world and know the way a computer chip operates. Like who the hell cares? Like these things are irrelevant. Like you work hard, you make that work ibadah, you know, whatever you get, you know, any sadaqah you give to your family, whatever, you know, food you feed your family, that's a sadaqah. But at the same time, like don't rely on people, you know, and the Prophet ﷺ looked down on that as well. The people who would beg, the people who would, you know, go out of their way to sit at home and not work and, oh, tawakkal, you know, I'm going to sit here and money's going to come. No, go out there, make a rizq. And with your rizq, you can make the situation of others better.
For sure.
Right?
It was actually the first, like the bay'ah that the Ansar took with the Prophet ﷺ. And they told him, what should we give you bay'ah for? And he said, تَعْبُدُ اللَّهَ وَلَا تُشْرِكُوا بِهِ شَيْئًا. You worship God, you don't associate anyone in worship with him, you pray 5 times a day. And the third thing he said was, وَعَلَى أَلَّا تَسْأَلُوا النَّاسَ شَيْئًا, that you don't ask people for anything. And that was like prohibition of begging and expecting like people to pay on you and give you money and stuff like that. And there's a great scholar in the past, Sufyan al-Thawri, one of the great scholars of hadith. I read a few quotations from him that were really interesting. One of them was that he was saying in the past, so he's from the first generations of Muslims, but maybe a little bit towards like tabi'un or the tabi'un. It's like the second generation. So he's saying in the past, so he's talking about like the first generation.
Right.
He's saying they would say to give up money. And that's because, the amount of money that was coming into the Muslim lands at that time was just like incredible.
Right.
From the Persian Empire and from all these, there's so much money coming in. He's like, they would say to give up money. He's like, but today we say that you have to go and work for money because it is tursun mu'min, it is the shield of the believer. Like if the Muslim ummah does not have money and you're not out there trying to find money, then the Muslims have no protection. You think about it, like subhanAllah, everyone that's fighting these ideological battles right now, all of them are billionaires, right? Who's the Muslim billionaire? Like the guy who's defending Islam or Muslims with their...
No, he doesn't exist. No,
that person doesn't exist.
He's the Mahdi.
Right?
We're still waiting for him to show up. Yeah.
Yeah, but like you see like George Soros on the left and, all these like different guys on the right. I forgot the name of the one who's like been funding Trump like crazy.
Right.
Anyways, all these like different, Rupert Murdoch and all these billionaires and they're fighting their ideological wars. We don't even have anybody at that level of wealth, right? Yeah. And same scholar, Sufyan al-Thawri, he was asked the question. He said, what do you say to a man that... They asked him a question. They said, okay, if a man could work the full day, but he'll miss Salat al-Jama'ah in the masjid, but he will earn a full dinar. And with it, he'll be able to take care of his family. Or he prays Salat al-Jama'ah in the masjid, and he works the rest of the day, but he only gets... like 7 dirhams, like less than a dinar, but it's not enough to pay for his family. He said, what should he do? He said he should work, earn the dinar, and pray alone. And that's like one of the scholars of the Salaf saying that. And today, if you were to say that in a masjid, people would be like, there's a class of Muslims who would be like, astaghfirullah, how could you possibly say that? But this is like vision, right? Understanding if people aren't actually earning wealth and trying to exceed and trying to excel and trying to be at the top of society, that you're just asking for destruction for the rest of the ummah, right?
Bro, poverty leads to kufr.
It does, yeah.
100%. I can see that in people sometimes. Yeah. When people become so desperate, they'll do crazy things. When people really have no choice, they'll sell themselves, they'll sell their children, they'll sell their dignity, they will commit crimes, and that's under the guise of trying to eat, right? And, it's to me so mind-boggling, especially for people who have never really been poor, maybe people who have, alhamdulillah, grown up in a comfortable life or a situation, for them to knock on wealth and be like, oh, it's not that great. It's what statistics show. This is studies that show that the difference between middle class and upper class is not that great in terms of enjoyment of luxury, right? Like, I have 1 car, you have 3 cars, great. I can still only drive 1 car at a time, so it doesn't really make a difference, right? Yeah. You have a house, I have an apartment, great. I have a bed, you have a bed, we both sleep at night. Yeah. But the difference between someone who's living in advent poverty and a middle class person, that scale is huge, right? Because the difference between having a meal and not having a meal is much different than having a steak and having spaghetti, right? You have the greatest meal, I have an okay meal, and this person has no meal, right? So sometimes we forget the real hardship that poverty comes with. It tests everything. It tests your iman. It tests your tawakkul. It tests your relationships with people. I've seen this actually with a lot of reverts. It's funny enough, a lot of reverts who come into Islam. I don't know why it's the case, but it seems like we often attract to community. I mean, this is actually the sunnah of the Prophet, where he always attracted the people who were lowly in society or thought or perceived to be, right? These people, their hearts are always, I believe, closer to God. Yeah. A lot of poor people who will come into Islam, many of them, they find that for whatever reason, they come to the Muslim community, they expect to get some type of help. They feel like, oh, brotherhood, and you gave me all these hugs and this and that. But hey, look, brother, I don't actually have a place to sleep tonight. That's actually one of the themes in my film Tug of War. This guy comes out of prison. He's this, revived, reborn Muslim, but it's like, I don't have a home. Yeah. Right. That type of test will actually drive a person deeper into kufr. Yeah.
That's what the Prophet said, أعوذ بك من الفقر والكفر. Seek refuge in you from poverty and from disbelief. Because there's a relationship.
There is, 100%.
Yeah. You're right. So that scene in the movie, that was an interesting scene. So the brother gets out of prison, and then you're the actor. Yeah. And he's trying to, he gets kicked out of his home.
Yeah, he goes home and his parents want nothing to do with him. They
because
tell
they're
him
upset because he got arrested. And all
yeah,
that.
and he has a child that he just found out about as well. So his family's just like, this guy's a waste.
Yeah. So then he tries to go to the masjid to sleep, and then the masjid people are like, "Sorry, you can't sleep here."
Yeah, it was actually shot at Salahuddin. Funny enough.
Oh yeah.
Just because they let me use, they didn't even know what I was doing. I'm like, I'm just gonna stay here after a shot.
whatever.
They're like, yeah, do your thing. Yeah.
Really, that's interesting.
I'm surprised you didn't recognize the scene.
Yeah. I guess because you had like a Pakistani imam or something.
He wasn't even the imam. He was most supposed to be like the caretaker or like he was a board member.
Board member.
Yeah, he wasn't the imam. Yeah.
So then you had part of like that theme was, or that scene was, he was like, "Would you do this if I wasn't black?" Do you remember that? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess it's a good segue into like, do you find that personally, like that friction, like non-acceptance?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like,
I live next to a masjid. I'm not going to say it. People, if they know where I live, then they'll know the masjid. Where I've been praying there for like, I lived in my community for like 4 years. Okay. It's Pickering. I live in Pickering. I just exposed myself. There you go.
and the masjid probably.
555. Maybe tell my address too. I live in a community where I go to a masjid daily and nobody says salam to me.
Wow.
Like that's weird. Because I grew up, I lived next to Salahuddin for a few years.
Yeah.
And Salahuddin, my biggest fitna with Salahuddin was when I went to pray, I couldn't leave.
Yeah. Everyone
wants to talk to you. Everyone wants to sit down, brother. What's going on? Da-da. They all want to have coffee. Da-da. So it was like a very big sense of community that I had there.
Yeah.
And before that, I lived next to Masjid Tariq. Right? And Tariq, again, the management's a bit funny, but the brothers, a lot of good brothers there. So I made good friends there, and even older brothers who I would sit with and talk, and actually I would learn from them. But I go to a masjid, literally, I walk in, I hold the door open for someone, the brother just comes in, just nods his head, doesn't say salam, doesn't even say thank you half the time. Okay, I walk in, I pray, I walk out, I grab my shoes, everybody's standing there, nobody says nothing to me, and I just say, and I just leave.
They're talking amongst themselves?
Oh, they talk to each other. Yeah, they talk to each other. I'm invisible.
Is it partly like socioeconomic level? Because like obviously Salahuddin is like a poor area. And
Poor people are nicer? I don't know. Maybe.
I don't know. Is that, do you see that or no?
No, I don't think it's socioeconomic because there are other masajid that are in not so socioeconomically well-off areas that are similar culture, and it's just the same thing.
Same thing. Eh?
It's like some people almost need you to validate your Islam. Like if your Islam is not like my Islam, or you're not where I'm from, it's a very like weird portal that they come from, where, and like, this is probably the immigrant experience, right? Like you grew up in a certain way, that masjid is like the back home masjid to you, where everyone, where everybody knows your name. This is from Cheers and stuff. That's a bad show. But you grew up in that circumstance where culturally and ethnically, that's how you associate Islam. Right? It's more of a cultural phenomenon than it is a spiritual one.
Right.
So for some people, you don't fit into that mold. You're not really there. I genuinely feel invisible there, which to a certain extent I kind of enjoy. I'm more of like an introvert sometimes, especially when you're praying next to your house. I don't want to spend time there. I want to just pray and go home, because then salah becomes a burden for me. I don't want it to feel like that. So I like to just go pray, do my adhkar, and go home, so I can go home, do work, whatever. But yeah, I would never in a million years decide to join that masjid, become like a board member, get active there. Like I have zero ambition whatsoever. The imam at that masjid, funny enough, is really cool with me. He knows me. He always says salam to me. He tries to get me involved in things, but I'm just like, nah, man, this masjid sucks.
Yeah, that's interesting. But then the thing is, like, if you stop showing up, would they notice?
They don't even. I'm gone for weeks and months at a time. Nobody knows. I tell you, I don't matter there. And I'm a musalli. Like I pray like every salah there.
Wow.
So when you see me, it's like, you don't just see me once a day. Like you see me 4 or 5 times a day, you know? There's a few people who like, okay, they know me. I, casually say salam to them. Other people, I know the car they drive. They know the car I drive. My car is very distinct. I have a bright orange car. So anybody sees my car, either think it's a taxi or they know it's me.
Now you get in the city in the car.
Oh yeah, it's fine. They're going to find me sooner or later. So, but yeah, I mean, like, I travel, so sometimes I'm not in the country for whatever. Right. When I come back, it's never like, hey, where were you? It's just like, hey. It's not even hey. But there's other masajid that I don't visit that often, but I do pray there whenever I'm around. And if I'm not even there for the next day's salah, they're like, hey, where were you, man? It's just like, what happened to you? And I'm like, and people get it like now. They're like, oh, he travels, whatever. So, sometimes I'm not here, but it's just a reality. Like, so one is, yes, in certain spaces, people of color or the wrong color don't exist, right? Then there's also, it's funny, I have a few white Muslim convert friends, right? One brother who I'm pretty close with. He's actually a good brother. And me, I like to feel like, because racism has never worked to my advantage, I never had a reason to be racist, right? Like I grew up with people from all different backgrounds. I had a lot of white friends, a lot of black friends, a lot of, Chinese friends, whatever. Like some of my closest friends, I feel fortunate enough that I grew up in downtown Toronto, where it was like the United Nations. Like my school, everything was just very, very diverse. So my friendships never discriminated. I never had a sense in my heart to be like, oh, this white guy, I don't want to hang out with him, whatever.
Right.
But I almost sometimes I don't tell them, but sometimes casually I might be like, as a white Muslim, you kind of, as a white Muslim female who wears hijab, you kind of lose a little bit of your white privilege because now you're hijabi, so you're just ambiguously brown. You could be Arab, you could be whatever. Yeah. As a white Muslim guy, you probably still have a lot of capital in Muslim circles. Like I've been to conferences and I've heard specifically from shuyukh and people who have ilm who say like, we need more white faces. We want more, like, where are all the white shuyukh? We want them here. And I've seen the reaction from like older heads when they gather these people together. And it's like, yes, look, Islam has finally made it. إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحِ. Here they are, Yeah. And it's the saddest thing in the world. To me, it's just like this weird self-colonial, like you've just imposed these same conditions on yourself that, white people somehow authenticate Islam for you.
There's definitely like a point system, because it's kind of like the white convert is worth the most. And then like the black or Latino converts are like, okay, less.
They're pitied a bit more.
Pitied, but then like the worst would probably be like the Hindu convert.
The Hindu or like the Iranian, like Arab, Christian, whatever. They're like, what the hell? Why aren't you Muslim to begin with? Like,
Exactly.
It's like, what is this guy even doing? He's wasting his... I have one friend, Iranian brother, who was a self-proclaimed atheist and actually became Muslim. He took Shahada.
Yeah.
He said like people just were like we have a brother here, and actually it's Baba Ali. I was gonna say his name, Baba Ali, who before Baba Ali was practicing, I don't know if people know this, before he was practicing Islam, he grew up in a household that was just non-religious whatsoever.
Right.
So I remember he was telling us a funny story where like, he goes to the masjid and they're like, oh, we have a brother here, he's gonna take Shahada. What's his name? Ali. They're like, what? Like, this guy wants to take Shahada? Ali? Come on, man, get the hell out of here. Like, you should have been with the program already, It's like, it's disappointing Shahada. It's like, God, we got to do this again,
But it's real, man, because I've had the same experience, like television shows, like Muslim television shows. Yeah. They're like, we need some white people. We need some white converts.
Yeah.
Right? That's the only way we validate that we are.
The best is when I show up and like, brother, tell us your convert story.
Yeah.
I was like, well, all started with Bilal radiallahu anhu. And, I'm just like, what do you mean convert, dude? Like, my family's been Muslim since, like, we don't know how long, you know what I mean? But it's just the perception is like, no, Muslim is like this. You look like this. You're from this background. If you're black, you're definitely a convert. Yeah. I guess I have a weird look. Some people just confuse me for a lot of things. They either think people think I'm either Somali. Somalis think I'm Somali. No Ethiopians think I'm Ethiopian. African Americans will think most people think I'm like African American or something like that. They just, especially in the US, people just confuse me as just being black African American, which I have no issues with. But it's always like, I feel like, there's a bit of ambiguity maybe to the way I look. Maybe in Toronto, I blend in more, so people don't have that same problem. But in other communities where there aren't as many East African people, it's like, in the UK, for example, in certain pockets, it's like, oh, you must be a convert. And I'm like, there's like 100 zillion Muslims in Africa, right? Like, you know that, right? Like,
it is the only continent in which Muslims are the majority.
Yeah.
But people don't
register that. Yeah, I'm like, there's like 110 million Muslims in Nigeria alone, right? Like, it's like crazy numbers. But to them, it's like, no. Especially in where we come from, in this part of the world, it's either you're Arab, ambiguously Arab, whatever that means. You could be Egyptian or Lebanese, or you're Pakistani, or you're Somali.
Yeah.
Right. Anything outside of that.
There are three options.
Yeah, there's those three options. Anything outside of that is just like, you're the other. If you're like Indonesian, we're like, okay, you're like a Chinese convert or something. Something going on with your eyes. I can't really tell, but you're not really Muslim. I mean, meanwhile, Indonesia is like the largest Muslim country on earth, right? Yeah. So we have a very skewed perception of Islam here. So like going back to what you're mentioning. So yeah, there are spaces where if you don't fit that mold, if you don't fit that cultural style, or you don't speak that cultural language, you just kind of feel left out.
So let me get your take on this. In the US, there was a Black Muslim Conference. I don't know if you heard of it.
Yeah, there's a few of them. I've heard a few of them.
Yeah. And I guess some people like raised flags about that, and they're like, is that legitimate? What's your take on that? Because, okay, you made the case that you're obviously invisible in some certain spaces. Like, it's just like you don't exist. Like, you're missing from the masjid. It's like you weren't there to begin with. And so their argument is like, okay, we have to create spaces in which we're identified, which we're recognized, in which we can talk about our issues, in which we can, and it's no problem for us to feel a sense of pride in who we are and where we come from and our identity and blah, blah, blah. At what point are you crossing the line? Like, at what point does it become tribal?
I think, so another example I'll give you is, for example, I was in South Africa a few weeks back. And in South Africa, the Muslim population there is heavily Indian, right? It's actually synonymously Indian. So when you think of Muslim, you think of Indian.
Right.
So in Johannesburg, there's now a movement of, I don't know what you'd call them, indigenous African Muslims,
right?
And they're really like, I think I have it bad here. Like, they really don't exist there. And they're from the townships. They're from the very small communities. So they get no respect, right? So they are now pulling together and saying, we need to have our own indigenous Muslim voices. We need to have our own scholars. We need to have our own, because the Islam in South Africa is very much tied to India. It's the fatwa and everything, and they're, very hardcore Indian Islam. Like, they teach Islam in Urdu, right? So to an indigenous African Muslim, you're like, what is that? That nothing to do with me. That's not my culture. That's not my identity. So I think when you understand those perspectives and how people can really feel marginalized and how that can play with their own self-perception, right? When you begin to then feel like your Islam is not really valid because you're not from this background, or because you're not Ahlul Bayt, or you're not whatever, right? I think it is very important to have those safe spaces where people can have those discussions and discourse without being called out upon. Now, I think the moment when it becomes like exclusively like, I'm checking your paper bag test at the door, like, are you dark enough to get in, those types of things. I think people who are not from those communities need to become allies and need to help support those people to actually get to a place of strength where they feel like we can integrate properly with the rest of the community. Because for whatever reason, there has been an injustice done to them. They feel a certain way. You don't have to acknowledge it. You have to respect it, though. You have to feel like, what you feel is legitimate, The same way with sisters, like, which one of us would self-impose ourselves on a sisters-only conference? To feel like, why is it only women? Like, no, women have unique needs. They have unique discussions and discourses that they should be able to express openly. Why do we then feel like I need to be a part of those discussions as well? No, dude, you don't. I think it's people's own sense of self-righteousness that makes it feel like, there's nothing wrong. So why should I not be allowed at that discussion?
Right.
Then again, if it was like, we need to have a white reverts Muslim community, I'd be a little bit weirded out. I'd be like, all right, that must be pushing the line a little bit. Even though I could definitely acknowledge the fact that there maybe are unique, situations where people want to make shura, they want to get, different thoughts and discussions with people that have the same background as them. So I think it's a very delicate thing. I don't think, it's never something that I would self-impose myself on. If somebody says, I want to create a safe space where I feel comfortable to talk with people that share a similarity with me, being a person who tries to be supportive, I would never feel like it's my duty to then investigate that claim, right?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, but I think there's always another pull, right? So you get the pull of like exactly how you described it, but then you get the pull of some groups or some people, and they could be very small in number, but they want to pull it into our Islam should be distinct completely as Black Muslims to the point that there's a barrier between us and other Muslims, right?
So, okay, to counter
do you get what I mean?
Yeah, I do understand.
Because even with women, and we brought up the women example, there will be those who are like, okay, our ideology should be more in terms of equality,
more liberal, more secular
kind of
in nature,
feminism type of
so
agendas,
and anything that goes against Quran and Sunnah, we throw it out the door. That's automatic, right? Like, our allegiance is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first and foremost. If you cannot base yourself upon basic foundational principles, then your discussion is flawed to begin with. Right?
Yeah, but you know what I mean? Like, there'll be people who will be like, I love my Black Muslims brothers and sisters, right? That's a statement on its own. It's completely fine, But then it's like when they keep saying that over and over to the point where they're kind of sending a message of like, this is the only community I care about. The rest of the ummahs, I don't even care about them.
Yeah.
You get what I mean?
Yeah, no, I completely understand.
Yeah.
And I just to counter that, I would say that, for example, the reason why you would never see a Pakistani only Muslims conference is because all Pakistani conferences are Pakistani only.
Yeah.
Right? You don't have to have a separate space or discourse for that.
Right.
When you have a conference at specific masajid in the city, you know what to expect, right? Same thing in certain Arab communities, right?
Yeah.
There's no need for those separate spaces because those spaces exist
Right.
majority of the time anyways. So it's the same discussion we have, for example, with white people, and we say like, why do we need to have, maybe spaces where, like, in university, I went to Ryerson University. Sometimes we get into these weird spaces where we want to have like a students of color coalition, and we want to have discussions among students of color, and white people get really offended by that.
Why
They'd be
can't we
like,
have a white-
why can't we have a white only? And you're like, idiot, because the whole school is white only. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So remember, this is people trying to carve a niche in a larger discussion. So other people who feel like they're not invited to those discussions is because you are actually part of the mainstream community anyways, right? So you don't need to have a special secret society with a special knock at the door because that's the regular day in the life for you, right? At the same time, I feel like, nationalism is a very disgusting thing. I personally, I fall into a weird camp because some people agree with me, some people don't agree with me, but I feel like, anything that has traits of nationalism and is, about promoting a certain group or a race or anything of that sort, to me is disgusting. I don't, it doesn't sit well in my stomach. Even when we have, cause I do a lot of these kind of like Black Muslim this, Black Muslim that, like even my identity as a Black Muslim is very different than other Black Muslims. Remember, like I come from a very specific culture. So a Black Muslim conference, for example, in the US wouldn't typically represent me. Right, it would represent the African American experience, and the African American experience is more in line with former Nation of Islam, Boonaa Mohammed, and that kind of transition. And so they have a very specific set of histories and ideas and philosophies that they are now changing and shifting. So even those discussions actually are centered around a very specific community. It's not even a Black in terms of the over-encompassing word Black. It's a very specific African-American identity type of thing. Of course, there will be spaces for people like myself who can then talk to the larger realities of modern-day racism and the realities that we face today. But historically speaking, those people are brought together for a very specific reason. Right? So, again, I think it's important to respect those spaces because once you understand that it's not necessarily a broad call of discrimination of others, but actually it's a very inclusive call of unity amongst people who specifically have been, traditionally marginalized, and they've been traditionally left out of religious spaces. When's the last time in Canada, we don't have them as much. We don't have African Americans really in Canada. We have African Canadians, but mainly we have like people of Jamaican and Caribbean heritage. When was the last time you'd seen a Jamaican administrator in a masjid? When was the last time you saw an indigenous or even indigenous, if there were any Aboriginal Muslims here? When was the last time you saw any on a board in any masjid? Right? They're not represented in our communities. So even though we talk about ummah, really we're not talking about everyone. We're talking about ourselves. So in response to that, people have every right to say, you have not been inclusive, thus we need to create that inclusivity on our own. So those creations of those specific, movements and groups that are focusing on enriching and helping support those people are actually created in response to our own faults as a community. So in many ways, it's like we did them injustice. Now they want to heal, and we're upset about it. Right. Because if they were included, if the moment that brother took shahada, we invited him to our home, we, let him eat from our food, we married him to our daughters, we, khalas, you're one of us, that's it. There would be no feeling of isolation, right? There would be none of that kind of those same experiences. So in reality, that's just a response to our own shortcomings. The fact that these people have not been properly integrated into the larger Muslim community. Toronto is a unique example because, again, we are very diverse, but at the same time, our diversity is very much represented by, like I said, those three specific ethnic groups, right? You're either Arab, ambiguously, whatever that means, you're Pakistani, or you're Somali, right? So anyone outside of those groups, and I know a lot of people, even Black Muslims, who don't feel comfortable going to Somali masjids. Right, you would think like, oh, these are Black people as well, but it's not. It's completely different, like 100% like backwards to some people. Right, Black Muslims who go there and they feel like, oh, I'm gonna have a sense of belonging, and they don't. Right, so I was telling this to a brother, subhanAllah. I was in Medina and I was visiting some of the brothers who were studying in the Jamia, right? And I told them, we were having a discussion, and I was very privileged to have lunch with them because it was probably like 10 students that were studying there. And they all get together and they heard I was town. So they said, okay, we're going to have lunch with the brother, whatever. I told them a piece of advice. I said, when you come back to Canada, be very careful, because people will not ask you for a dalil. They will look at you as a person, at what you stand for. And if they can connect with your heart, they will trust everything you say. It's a very scary reality.
Yeah.
Some people are just drawn towards other people, not because of their Islamic knowledge, not because of their taqwa, but because this person represents something that I can also represent and I agree with. People to this day, this is not for me to brag, people refer to me as Sheikh Boonaa, Sheikh, and I'm like, what the hell are you talking about, Sheikh? You know what I mean? But I realize, and people ask me for fatwa, they ask me questions, and I realize the only reason they're doing that is because they like me and they can relate to me. They don't know me. I'm a jerk behind closed doors. They'll never know, right? Yeah. But because for whatever reason, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed their hearts to connect to me, they are willing and able to accept whatever I have to tell them. When we can connect with people's hearts, and the da'wah of the Prophet ﷺ was about connecting hearts. It wasn't about connecting people to lectures or literature or rules or whatever. It was when you love the Prophet ﷺ and you saw what he stood for. He was Al-Amin before he was Al-Rasul. People learned that about him to the extent where when he came with the message, it was like, khalas, of course.
Yeah.
Why would he lie? Khadija said when he came down from the mountain, why would Allah do this to you? You're a great person. You take care of it. It was a given, right? Abu Bakr and everyone was like, we wouldn't even second think it, because that's human nature, right? When we understand and we love and appreciate people for who they are, we are willing to go with them the extra mile. So I think there's a huge disconnect in our da'wah, that for whatever reason, we have just not made ourselves likable. We have set up so many barriers for people to like us and to actually connect with us. And I always say that for especially youth, the youth da'wah movement and scene, it's more about hearts than it is about dalil.
For sure.
You know what I mean? Anyone can open up Sahih Bukhari. You're not the first person to read me a quote from Ibn Taymiyyah or whatever. The information is available there online. But when I look at you and I see a person who is, what I want to be like, or has certain characteristics that I'm drawn towards, is charismatic, is funny, and I look at this person and I say, wow, I like this person. You meet some people in life who you like.
Yeah.
By the way, this is a side note. I've never met a Sudanese person that I didn't like. I love all Sudanese people. It's the weirdest thing. I'm not Sudanese. But every Sudanese person that I meet, I like them instantly. Wow. I don't know why. They're just such chilled out people. But there are some people who I meet, non-Sudanese, of course, right? That I just, within 20 seconds of meeting them, I just don't like them. It just whatever reason, the way they rub me the wrong way, or, the hearts just for whatever don't connect. But there are people who, when you connect with them, you will believe everything they say. It'll be hard. It's a fitna for you to go against them. Right. That's another issue we have, obviously, with celebrity worship. And when people have these scholars and people who, do make mistakes, and pretty obvious and large mistakes, but yet we're unwilling to acknowledge them because of the fact that we're so connected to them. So this is a double-edged sword. The people who are trying to do something positive and connect people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we should be in the business of connecting hearts. We should be in the business of connecting with people's hearts on a more spiritual level, on a more personal, loving level. And then once you have their hearts, you can tell them whatever. It's the same reason why the companions, I think it was Aisha radiallahu anha who narrated that if the prohibitions of khamr had come out in the beginning of Islam, people wouldn't have been able to follow through with it, right? It would have been too much of a burden. But because they were reminded of Jannah and Jahannam, and their iman and taqwa was built, then when the revelations came, they just let the wine flow in the streets like nobody cared.
It's true.
Right? There's a process to connecting with people. Too often we're like, brother, fear Allah. This is dalil. Da 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 da. Yeah. And you don't realize, hey, this person's a human being. They have whatever issues. People are insecure. Some people have their own whatever grievances, their own nafs, whatever. Like, connect with them on a spiritual level, on a one-to-one human level first, and you'd be surprised how far it can go.
Yeah, so true. Well, I think we went over our time.
Did we start rolling?
Yeah, we just started.
Oh, we just started now. Okay.
Yeah, no, I would keep, honestly,
I thought it was a warm-up.
I would keep talking, but I don't know, some analytics that show that when we go over like an hour and 10 minutes or so.
How long have we been going?
It's been an hour and 15 minutes.
Oh, khalas,
people stopped listening for some reason.
Oh, yeah.
I had an amazing session with Mamoon. I know,
really well. And another Sudanese who I just love for no reason.
like him and I have really good conversations, and even though we never meet each other, but for some reason, like there's certain people you just get great conversations with. So we went for like an hour and 40 minutes, but then he didn't get as many like listens as I wanted. It was actually probably my favorite podcast. So, but I learned from then that whenever you go over a certain number, that people stop listening.
That's cool.
So, anyways, we didn't even go through all the questions I want to ask you, so you're gonna have to come on another time, inshallah.
Part 3 and 4, inshallah.
Inshallah. I really appreciate it. I know you came from really far in Pickering.
Yeah.
Driving your orange car.
Yeah.
But
I think I might change the color now that everybody knows. My mom hates the color too. My mother-in-law thought I was a Beck taxi when I first got it, which is quite rude, I guess.
They have those still?
Yeah.
They're not all Ubers? Okay. But Jazakallah khair, I really appreciate it. And inshallah we'll be doing this again for sure.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.